The man convicted in the torture murders of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom back in court today.
On the morning of January 7, 2007, in Knoxville, Tennessee, a railroad worker was making his routine rounds along the tracks behind Chipman Street. It was a cold Sunday morning, quiet and unremarkable. But what he discovered that day would shock the entire community to its core. The worker found a body on the railroad tracks, burned beyond recognition and wrapped in a comforter. The victim's hands were bound behind the back with shoelaces. This was Christopher Newsom, a 23-year-old man from Knoxville. According to the medical examiner's findings, Christopher had been shot 3 times in the neck, back, and head. He had also been sexually assaulted. His killers had stuffed a sock in his mouth, tied his wrists and ankles, and covered his head with a sweatshirt that was tied around his neck. After killing him, they set his body on fire. But Christopher was not the only victim. Just 3 meters away, inside a rental house on Chipman Street, investigators would soon make an even more terrible discovery. A young woman named Channon Christian, age 21, had been held captive in that house. She was a college senior at the University of Tennessee, just weeks away from graduation. According to the investigation, Channon had been tortured for hours. Her attackers had poured bleach down her throat. She had been beaten repeatedly, and her body showed signs of severe trauma. In the final hours of her life, she was stuffed into a kitchen garbage can, wrapped in trash bags, where she slowly suffocated to death in complete darkness. Just 12 hours before these discoveries, Channon and Christopher had been a normal young couple in love. They had simple plans for Saturday night: dinner, maybe a movie, and then a friend's party. Instead, they were carjacked by 5 individuals who saw them as easy targets. What followed was a nightmare of violence that lasted nearly 48 hours. It would take 12 years and 8 separate trials to bring all of their killers to justice. This is Accused, and tonight we are covering one of the most disturbing cases in Tennessee history. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from right now. Before we go further into what happened, you need to understand who Channon and Christopher really were. They were not just victims. They were real people with families, dreams, and bright futures ahead of them. Channon Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. When she was 12 years old, her family moved to Tennessee and settled in the suburbs of Knoxville. At Farragut High School, Channon was well-liked by everyone. Teachers remembered her bright smile and positive attitude. Her friends described her as someone who could walk into any room and make everyone feel welcome. She had a natural ability to make people feel like they mattered. But Channon was not just popular. She was also smart and driven. By January 2007, she was close to graduating from the University of Tennessee with a degree in sociology. She had chosen this field because she wanted to make a real difference in the world. Channon planned to work with communities that needed help. Her parents, Gary and Deanna Christian, were incredibly proud of their daughter. She was involved in many activities, including golf, and always made time to care about the people around her. On Saturday, January 6, 2007, Gary and Deanna expected Channon to come home by Sunday morning. She always kept her word and always called when she said she would. When Sunday morning arrived and the phone stayed silent, they knew something was terribly wrong. They had no way of knowing that their daughter was already dead. Christopher Newsom was born on September 21, 1983, and he was from Knoxville. At Halls High School, Christopher was a baseball star. His teammates remembered him as someone who played every game with heart and always encouraged others. He was not the biggest or strongest player, but he had determination and a great team spirit. After high school, Christopher stayed in Knoxville. He attended Roane State Community College and learned carpentry. He became very skilled at his trade. If you drive through Knox County today, you can still see Christopher's work in many homes. The crown molding he created stands as proof of a young man who took pride in building things that would last. At 23 years old, Christopher was building more than houses. He was building a life with Channon Christian. Their friends said they were perfect together. Channon was full of energy and big dreams, while Christopher was steady and supportive. He was the kind of person who always replied to messages quickly and showed up when he said he would. On Saturday night, January 6th, his friends expected to see him at a party. They sent texts and left voicemails, but got no response. By Sunday morning, Christopher's phone had gone silent forever. If you are finding this story important and want to see more content like this on Accused, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Saturday, January 6, 2007, started like any normal weekend for Channon and Christopher. They had simple plans, the kind that millions of young couples make every Saturday night. They were going to have dinner, possibly see a movie, and then meet up with friends at a party. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Just another night for two people in love who had no idea they were living their final hours. Channon spent the afternoon at her friend's apartment on Washington Pike in North Knoxville. She was getting ready for the evening, taking her time like she always did. Friends later said she was in a great mood that day and excited about the plans ahead. Around 8 p.m., Christopher arrived in his truck to pick her up. Security cameras in the apartment complex parking lot captured what happened next, though at the time, no one was paying any attention. Channon walked out to meet Christopher. They hugged. It was a simple, sweet moment between two people who loved each other. This kind of moment happens thousands of times every day in parking lots everywhere, but this time someone was watching from the shadows of that parking lot. 5 individuals had been driving around that Saturday night looking for victims. They were looking for someone to rob and hurt. Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom had just become their targets. What happened next took less than 5 minutes. At gunpoint, both Channon and Christopher were forced into the back of Channon's Toyota 4Runner. Their hands were tied behind their backs with shoelaces. Their normal Saturday night had instantly become a nightmare. The 4Runner pulled away from the apartment complex at around 9 p.m. Inside the vehicle were now 7 people, Channon and Christopher as terrified captives, and 5 attackers who were already planning terrible things. Meanwhile, across town, friends were gathering for the party. They checked their phones, wondering where Channon and Christopher were. This was not like them to be late without calling. They tried texting with no response. They called, but the calls went straight to voicemail. By 10 p.m., friends were starting to worry. By 11 p.m., some of them drove back to the apartment complex where the couple had last been seen. They found Christopher's truck still parked where he had left it, but Channon's 4Runner was gone. Both Channon and Christopher had disappeared. 3 miles away at a rental house on Chipman Street, the real horror was just beginning. What would happen over the next 48 hours would be so brutal that even experienced homicide detectives would struggle to describe it in court later. To understand what happened to Channon and Christopher, you need to know about the 5 people who took them. The house at 2316 Chipman Street was a rental property in North Knoxville. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary, but inside, it was a place where violence was being planned. The house belonged to 25-year-old Lamarcus Davidson. Davidson was not just a criminal, he was a career offender. 5 months before these murders, he had been released from prison after serving 5 years for carjacking and aggravated robbery. Within months of getting out, he was back to dealing drugs and planning violent crimes from his house on Chipman Street. Davidson's half-brother, Lidolvis Cobbins, was 24 years old and had his own criminal history of robbery convictions. The brothers encouraged each other's violent behavior. There was also George Thomas, age 24, known on the streets as Detroit. Thomas had multiple felony convictions and a reputation for violence. Eric Boyd, 34, was the oldest member of the group. He was another career criminal with a history of violent crimes. The group also included a 5th member, Vanessa Coleman, who was only 18 years old. She was Cobbins' girlfriend. To outsiders, she might have seemed like just a teenager who got caught up with the wrong crowd. But what Coleman did over the next 48 hours proved that she was just as responsible as the men she was with. On Saturday, January 6th, these 5 individuals made the decision to go out and find victims to rob and attack. They had no specific plan or target in mind. They were simply driving around Knoxville, waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity came at the Washington Pike apartment complex when they spotted Channon and Christopher. After forcing the couple into the 4Runner at gunpoint, the 3-mile drive to Chipman Street must have felt like forever for Channon and Christopher. They had no idea where they were being taken or what these people planned to do. They had no idea they would never see their families again. Davidson drove the vehicle with Cobbins in the passenger seat. Boyd sat in the back, controlling the 2 victims and making sure they understood that any attempt to escape would end badly. At the Chipman Street house, Thomas and Coleman were waiting. At 12:33 a.m. on January 7th, something chilling happened. Channon's phone rang, and somehow she managed to call her parents. "I'll be back between 2 and 3 a.m., she told them. Her voice sounded steady, giving no hint of the terror around her. It was a lie that her captors forced her to tell, designed to buy them time before anyone realized she and Christopher were missing. It would be the last time Gary and Deanna Christian ever heard their daughter's voice. According to evidence presented in court, Christopher Newsom was immediately separated from Channon when they arrived at the house. His hands were bound behind his back with shoelaces. A sock was forced into his mouth. His head was covered with a sweatshirt tied around his neck, leaving him unable to see and struggling to breathe. The Knox County medical examiner testified that Christopher was sexually assaulted inside Davidson's house. The forensic evidence showed injuries consistent with assault. In the early morning hours of January 7th, Eric Boyd forced Christopher to walk barefoot from the house. Outside, the Tennessee winter was freezing cold. Temperatures were below freezing. Christopher, wearing only a shirt and underwear, was forced to walk nearly half a mile through the bitter cold to railroad tracks behind the house. Evidence suggested a dog leash was used to control him during this walk. His bare feet left bloody marks in the frost. At the railroad tracks, Christopher Newsom was shot 3 times. The first bullet hit his neck, but he survived. The second hit his back, and he was still alive. The third shot was fired with the gun pressed directly against his head, just above his right ear. This bullet killed him instantly. Christopher Newsom was dead at 23 years old. But the killers were not finished. They wrapped Christopher's body in a comforter, poured gasoline on it, and set it on fire. When a railroad worker discovered the remains the next afternoon, the body was so badly burned that dental records were needed for identification. While Christopher was being murdered at the railroad tracks, Channon Christian was being held captive in the north bedroom of Davidson's house. According to prosecutors, Vanessa Coleman was assigned to guard her. Forensic testimony revealed that Channon was repeatedly sexually assaulted by multiple attackers during her captivity. DNA evidence later confirmed that both Davidson and Cobbins assaulted her. The medical examiner described her injuries as severe, going far beyond simple assault. Channon was also beaten repeatedly and kicked. Her head had severe trauma from blunt force injuries. Carpet burns covered much of her body, suggesting she was dragged across floors during the attacks. According to Davidson's own confession, at some point during her captivity, Channon looked at her attackers and said words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "I don't want to die." Her plea for mercy was ignored. In the final hours of her life, the attackers made a deliberate decision to try to destroy DNA evidence. They poured bleach down Channon's throat. They scrubbed her body with cleaning chemicals. The bleach burned her mouth and throat, and these chemical burns were clearly visible during her autopsy. Then came the final horror. While still alive and breathing, Channon was bound using curtains and strips of bedding. Her face was covered with a small plastic bag. Her body was stuffed into multiple large trash bags and placed inside a residential garbage can in Davidson's kitchen. She was then covered with sheets. The medical examiner's testimony was clear. Channon Christian slowly suffocated to death in that garbage can. She was conscious and aware of what was happening to her. According to the timeline established at trial, Channon died sometime between the afternoon of January 7th and the afternoon of January 8th, at least 12 hours after Christopher had been murdered. On Sunday morning, January 7th, 2007, Gary and Deanna Christian were staring at their phones, waiting for a call that would never come. Channon had promised to be home between 2 and 3 a.m., but it was now past 10 a.m. with no word from their daughter. Meanwhile, across town, Hugh and Mary Newsom were experiencing the same terror. Their son Christopher had not come home, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Friends who had expected to see Channon and Christopher at the party the night before were also worried. Text messages went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. By Sunday afternoon, panic had set in. The families contacted Knoxville police for help. The response they received was frustrating. Officers suggested that maybe the young couple just decided to spend the weekend together or went out of town. The families were told to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report. Frustrated and terrified, the families took action themselves. They organized their own search parties and made their own flyers. They contacted Channon's cell phone provider and demanded to know the last location her phone had pinged. The answer led them to a cell tower on Cherry Street in North Knoxville. Late Sunday night into early Monday morning, January 8th, family members and friends searched the Cherry Street area, looking for Channon's distinctive Toyota 4Runner. At around 1:30 a.m. on January 8th, they found it. The 4Runner was parked at the intersection of Chipman Street and Glider Avenue, less than 2 blocks from Davidson's house. But Channon and Christopher were nowhere to be found. The vehicle immediately showed signs that something was wrong. The front seats had been pushed all the way back. Channon, who was only 5 feet 2 inches tall, could never have reached the pedals from that position. The floorboards were covered in mud, which was completely unlike how careful Channon was with her car. Stickers that Channon kept on her windows had been peeled off, and personal items she always kept in the car were missing. But investigators found something important: a pack of Newport cigarettes on the dashboard. Neither Channon nor Christopher smoked, and they definitely did not smoke Newports. This was the first real clue that someone else had been in Channon's car. The major breakthrough came from an envelope found inside the 4Runner. Investigators processed the envelope for fingerprints and got a match in the system. The fingerprint belonged to Lamarcus Davidson, a known felon with an address at 2316 Chipman Street, just 2 blocks from where the abandoned vehicle was found. On January 9, 2007, police obtained a search warrant for Davidson's house. When officers arrived at 2316 Chipman Street, they found the house empty. Davidson and his accomplices had fled, but the evidence they left behind told a horrifying story. In the kitchen, investigators made the discovery that would haunt them forever: Channon Christian's body, stuffed inside a residential garbage can and wrapped in multiple trash bags. The DNA evidence collected from the scene was overwhelming. Davidson's DNA was found in Channon's body. His fingerprints were on the garbage bags that contained her remains. Cobbin's DNA was also recovered from the victim. Items belonging to both Channon and Christopher were scattered throughout the house: her purse, her camera with photographs that had been ripped and burned, his baseball caps, his driver's license. The killers had kept items from their crimes. Shell casings found in Davidson's house matched the bullets that killed Christopher Newsom at the railroad tracks. But Davidson and his accomplices were gone, and a massive manhunt began. The break came on January 11th when police traced phone calls between Davidson and Eric Boyd. Boyd, under pressure, agreed to lead investigators to Davidson's hiding place, a vacant house on Reynolds Street. When police entered the location, they found Davidson along with Christopher Newsom's size 9.5 Nike shoes and a .22 caliber revolver, which was the murder weapon. Over the next several days, the remaining suspects were arrested. Thomas, Cobbins, and Coleman were arrested in Lebanon, Kentucky. Police found a computer showing the suspects had been monitoring news coverage of the murders. They also recovered Channon's overnight bag and other personal belongings. 5 arrests had been made. 5 killers who thought they had committed the perfect crime had made one critical mistake. They underestimated the determination of 2 families who refused to let their children be forgotten, and investigators who would not rest until justice was served. The trials began in 2008, and for the Christian and Newsom families, this meant reliving their worst nightmare in terrible detail. Eric Boyd was the first to face trial, but only in federal court for being an accessory after the fact. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The families knew this was not enough because they believed Boyd had done far more than just help cover up the murders. In August 2009, Ledelvis Cobbins faced a Knox County jury. After hearing the evidence, they sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 months later, Lamarcus Davidson went on trial. He was the ringleader who had planned everything. The jury sentenced Davidson to death. George Thomas received life without parole. Vanessa Coleman, the youngest of the group at just 18 years old, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. By 2010, it seemed like the case was finally over and the families could begin to heal. But then everything fell apart. Judge Richard Baumgartner, who had overseen all 4 state trials, was living a double life. In March 2011, he was forced to resign after admitting to years of drug addiction. The details were shocking. Baumgartner had been buying prescription pills from convicted felons and had been impaired while overseeing the most important murder trials in Knox County history. In September 2011, he was disbarred. Every conviction he had overseen was now in question. On December 1, 2011, all 4 defendants were granted new trials. The families who had endured years of testimony would have to go through it all again. The retrials began in 2012. Coleman was reconvicted with a reduced sentence of 35 years. Thomas was again found guilty. The Tennessee Supreme Court ultimately upheld Davidson and Cobbins' original convictions, but Eric Boyd still had not faced state murder charges. Mary Newsom, Christopher's mother, refused to give up. "I just had a gut feeling Eric Boyd was the one who killed him," she said. "And I wasn't going to let Eric get away with it." The Newsoms attended every hearing and every appeal, working tirelessly with prosecutors and investigators. The breakthrough came in 2018. 11 years after the murders, a Knox County grand jury finally indicted Eric Boyd on 36 counts, including first-degree murder. Boyd's trial began in August 2019. George Thomas testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence, admitting his role and identifying Boyd as Christopher Newsom's killer. On August 13, 2019, 12 years, 7 months, and 7 days after the murders, Eric Boyd was found guilty on nearly all charges. Judge Bob McGee sentenced him to life without parole plus 90 years. Finally, all 5 killers were behind bars for life. Justice had been served, but at an enormous cost. 12 years of legal battles, millions in taxpayer dollars, and countless hours forcing families to relive their worst memories. And most importantly, 2 young people remained dead, their futures stolen forever. From this unimaginable tragedy came meaningful change. The Christian Newsom case exposed serious problems in Tennessee's legal system. In June 2014, Governor Bill Haslam signed 2 landmark laws named after the victims. The Chris Newsom Act eliminated the 13th juror rule, which required that a judge must validate a jury's unanimous verdict. This old rule had allowed Judge Baumgartner's corruption to invalidate the original convictions, forcing families through years of additional trials. Under Chris's law, once a jury delivers a unanimous verdict, it stands. The Channon Christian Act protects victims from character attacks in court. Defense attorneys can no longer make irrelevant allegations against victims unless directly related to the case. These laws ensure that what happened to these families, the legal manipulation and endless retrials, can never happen again. The house at 306 Chipman Street was torn down in 2008. In its place stands a memorial where Channon and Christopher are remembered with dignity. The Channon Gale Christian Foundation provides scholarships for University of Tennessee students through an annual golf tournament celebrating her love of the sport. The Chris Newsom Memorial Foundation holds a yearly baseball tournament at Hall's Community Park. Over the years, it has provided 42 scholarships to Hall's high school students. Mary Newsom says she sees cardinals and butterflies everywhere, signs she believes that Christopher is still with them. 18 years later, 2 young people who had their futures stolen have become guardians of justice for others. Their names now protect victims across Tennessee. Their memories fund dreams for students who might otherwise never get the chance. Channon wanted to help communities in need. In death, her foundation continues that mission. Christopher took pride in building things that would last. His memorial foundation builds futures that endure for generations. January 6, 2007 will forever mark one of the darkest chapters in Knoxville's history. But 18 years later, Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom's names are spoken not just as victims, but as forces for change. Laws protect other victims because of them. Students receive scholarships in their memory. Their killers will never walk free again. The families will never stop grieving, and the pain remains. But they have transformed unimaginable loss into something powerful, a legacy that grows stronger every year. In the end, that is what endures. Not the evil that tried to destroy them, but the light that continues to shine in their memory. Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Their names deserve to be remembered. If this story moved you, please join our community here on Accused by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber helps us continue creating content that honors victims and brings important true crime stories to light. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.